I had hoped that we were done talking about the Olympic Games for 2024 at least. I really was hoping that. They the story had largely faded to the background except for one area, and that was sort of the memes, right? Spend any time on social media, you see the memes of the breakdancing lady, you see the memes of other things. I thought maybe we were past it for that. Unfortunately, no. The story of the Olympic Games keeps getting worse and worse. We all witnessed the demonic opening ceremony that mocked God. We saw the demonic closing ceremony that looked like it was celebrating Lucifer and welcoming the Antichrist. And between those stories were countless stories that showed how corrupt the whole thing was. Between issues about food service and trying to force the athletes to basically be the next best thing to vegan, to nakedly ideological displays during certain events, as well as athletes humiliating themselves to the mocking laughter of the world. It was possibly one of the most badly launched Olympics in history for those who tend not to look at things as and see the supernatural at work in things. But some stories haven't actually been told yet. And we're going to cover one today that's salient to Catholics because it has to do with faith at the games itself. And the story is not good. I'm going to set the stage for this news story by checking in with Pope Francis, who last Sunday gave an Angelus address, and it became weirdly relevant to the story when I saw this. You see, in front of 12,000 people, Pope Francis, rather shockingly, or perhaps not so shockingly, chastised people who rigidly cling to the faith. His address was short and is absolutely relevant to the story you're about to see because it's a juxtaposition and it kind of shows the tension that our priests often have when they're called to do their job, to live their vocation. And this is why we are reminded that we should be praying for our priests by name. I'm sure many of you forget to do it. That's understandable, but it's time to try to buckle up and pray for your priests. So let's go over Francis's Angelus. I'll give you the whole thing. It's really, really short. Not that worried about the after Angelus stuff because everything here relevant is in the front. So he says, this was given last Sunday. It sets the stage for this news piece we're going to talk about. Dear brothers and sisters, happy Sunday. Today, the gospel of the liturgy, John chapter 6, verses 41 to 51, tells us about the reaction of the Judeans to the statement of Jesus, who says, I have come down from heaven. See John chapter 6, verse 38. They are scandalized. They murmur among themselves, is this not Jesus, the son of Joseph, whose father and mother we know? How does he now say, I have come down from heaven? And they murmur like this. Let us pay attention to what they say. They are convinced that Jesus cannot have come from heaven because he is the son of a carpenter and because his mother and relatives are common people, familiar, normal people like so many others. How could God manifest himself in such an ordinary way, they say. They are obstructed in their faith by their preconception of his humble origins, and they are obstructed by the presumption, therefore, that they have nothing to learn from him. Preconceptions and presumptions, how much harm they do. They prevent sincere dialogue, a coming together of brothers and sisters. Beware of preconceptions and presumptions. They have their rigid mindsets, and there's no space in their heart for what does not fit into them, for what they are unable to catalog and file away in the dusty shelves of their security. And this is true. Very often our securities are closed up, dusty like old books. And yet they are people who observe the law, who give alms, who respect fasts and times of prayer. Indeed, Christ has already performed various miracles. How is it that all this does not help them to recognize in him the Messiah? Why does it not help them? Because they carry out their religious practices not so much in order to listen to the Lord, but rather to find in them the confirmation of what they think. They are closed to the word of the Lord and look for confirmation of their own thoughts. This is demonstrated by the fact that they do not even take the trouble to ask Jesus for an explanation. They limit themselves to murmuring among themselves against him, as though to reassure each other of what they are convinced, and they shut themselves in. They are closed up in an impenetrable fortress, and so they are unable to believe. The closure of the heart, how much harm it does, how much harm. Let us pay attention to all this because at times things can happen to us too in our life and our prayer. It can happen to us that instead of truly listening to what the Lord has to say, we look to him and others only for confirmation of what we think, a confirmation of our convictions, our judgments, which are prejudices. But this way of addressing God does not help us to encounter God, to truly encounter him, in order to open ourselves up to the gift of his light and his grace, in order to grow in goodness, to do his will, and to overcome failings and difficulties. Brothers and sisters, faith and prayer, when they are true, open the mind and the heart. They do not close them. When you find a person who is closed in their mind and prayer, that faith and that prayer are not true. Let us ask ourselves then, in my life of faith, am I capable of being truly silent within myself and listening to God? Am I willing to welcome his voice beyond my own mindset and also with his help to overcome my fears? May Mary help us to listen with faith to the Lord's voice and to do his will courageously. Now, some people I know, we're going to say that's not that big a deal. I was made aware of this, Angelus, by reading an article from the Remnant, because I read a little bit of it, then I read the Angelus, and I went back and read that Remnant article. And I want to tell you right now, my initial thought was echoed by that Remnant piece, which it sounds awfully a lot like this is the old Francis back. We haven't had this for a while, where he would give every opportunity to go after those mean, rigid trads. Right? These are our preconceived notions, this clinging rigidly, our faith not being real. Now, that's actually kind of a new one. He's kind of hinted at it before, but this time it's more open in your face. That we cling to these practices and our preconceived notions, but our faith isn't real because we're not willing to open our minds, which is also a weird thing for a pope to tell people. Open your minds. Conform your mind to the will of the church, but open your minds to those of different ways. Okay, how about no? How about no? Raven Ray says he feels personally insulted by this. I would, except this is it is, as Dean says, a classic sideways insult from Francis. And honestly, I'm not that surprised. And I didn't bring that here for you for us to riff on Francis so much. We're setting the stage with this main article. It's because it is surprising for those not really used to it. It's mixed with decent or indifferent stuff, right? But that's Francis's MO. Mix the good with the bad. It makes it easier to accept the bad and let it sort of worm its way into your mind. But let's bear in mind his little lesson there and compare that to a priest who was ordered around by tyrants. I'm going to show you now a priest who this is my first time encountering him. This is a priest named Father Edward Plain. I'm probably saying his name wrong. He, as this article from Poland Daily 24 gives us in the headline, a spiritual anchor for Polish athletes. His job is simple. He's the priest the Polish church assigned to meet the spiritual needs of their athletes at the Olympic Games. And presumably, being a priest, he could also say Mass for Catholics from Africa, the U.S., or wherever if they didn't have access to the sacraments. Because before he's Polish, he's a priest, right? That's generally how it works. To give you an idea of the character of this priest, here's a short background. This is the article, short background info for him. Quote, Father Edward Plain supports Polish athletes spiritually and emotionally, forming deep bonds and attending 11 Olympics since 2002. Remember, the Olympics every 2 years is a winter game and summer games, and he might have also done some of the Paralympics as well. Father Edward Plain has served as the chaplain for the Polish athletes for 22 years. Appointed by the Polish Episcopal Conference in 2002, his role extends beyond offering sacraments and conducting Mass. He is a confidant and often friend for athletes, confidant, and often friend for athletes, who affectionately call him Eddie. Attending his 11th Olympics in Paris, Plain emphasizes his availability to athletes over attending events. I'm here for the athletes, not to watch the competitions, he explains, showcasing his commitment to their emotional and spiritual well-being. He shares the joys and sorrows of the athletes, forming deep bonds over the years. He recounts how Camille Stokes' casual edziu during a phone call surprised Stokes' mother, highlighting their close friendship. The priest also recalls comforting a disappointed Otilia Jarecki in Cardinal Zen's homeland, showing his role in navigating their highs and lows. Despite his significant impact, the priest remains humble. He doesn't see himself as a co-author of the athlete's successes, but cherishes moments like when Rafael Maszka places his bronze medal around his neck, symbolizing years of hard work and dedication. End quote. He is a servant. He is a shepherd and a servant. He is a priest. Sacrifices his own ability to go watch events he might be interested in to be there for the athletes. It shouldn't be remarkable, a priest having a correct understanding of his job, but in our day and age, good priests should be applauded whenever we can. The Olympics, in theory, should not be a challenging assignment for a priest, right? Well, you'd be wrong. So let's go to Gloria TV, because I've got two different sources for this. The Gloria TV one is actually better than the actually Polish one because it gives you a little bit more information. The headline from Gloria TV is chaplain of Polish athletes, mass banned at Olympics in Paris. Yeah. So let's 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 go back and think about this for a second. Opening ceremony mocks the faith. And then they tell us it doesn't mock the faith until they admit that, yeah, it does mock the faith. And we were inspired by a painting that was explicitly painted 5 centuries ago to mock the faith. And we decided to do that on the world stage. Okay, so check. And then the closing ceremony was also, looks like it was welcoming the Antichrist or Lucifer. And they tried to warn people ahead of time. Hardly anybody's talked about the closing events. I don't know why. Covered it a couple days ago. But we had that. And then we had essentially ideology being forced on the athletes through dietary choices, as well as who could participate in some of the events, we'll say. All that checks out. So why is it then not that surprising that a Polish priest was not allowed to offer the Mass by the authorities of the Olympics? Now, the other thing is, I want to hear from chaplains for other countries. I don't know if the United States sends a chaplain or chaplains to meet the spiritual needs of their athletes. I kind of suspect they don't, but maybe the USCCB does. If you know the answer, if you know the priest who was sent by the US, let me know in the comments if that such person exists. Couldn't find any information on that. But I'd like to hear from other priests who were there. Were they given the same treatment? Were they told they can't celebrate the Mass? Let's go to the Gloria TV article on this. Quote, this year, in a break with past tradition, it was forbidden to celebrate Mass in the Olympic Village. The Polish Olympics chaplain, Father Edward Plain, told TISOL.pl on the 14th of August, 2 days ago. He has been a chaplain for Polish athletes for 22 years. Until this summer, it was always possible to celebrate Mass, but with restrictions during the idiocy of 2020 and 2022, they couldn't do it. In Paris, the priest wanted to determine the times of the Masses in advance, but the possibility of celebrating the Eucharist was blocked. He was told that, quote, only prayer was allowed. I don't know who came up with this absurdity, and the Mass is the most beautiful prayer, but they insisted. I couldn't understand it, and I still can't. That's what he had to say. And as one commenter says, there's nothing to understand. People who block the Mass hate the faith. And that is absolutely true. What do you think is going on here? I tell you exactly what I think is going on here. When the people who organize this thing put Satan on display at the opening and at the closing, and then try to force a questionable materialist ideology on people, on the athletes who are participating through, and one that is anti-human being in general through their dietary restrictions. They had to let up on it because the press was bad for it. But when you have that going on, and then you have all the other ideological things going on, you probably know what I mean, and so there's certain events happening there. When you start having all this picture being painted for you, then banning the Mass was actually not that surprising in hindsight. But this should put people on notice. Yes, the games are now over. In 4 years, there will be games happening in Los Angeles. And the once and future leader of my country has said that he will not allow such things to happen at the next games. We'll see about that. But because it's happening in Los Angeles, meaning it's happening in Hollywood, these are going to be the Hollywood games, folks. But are you this surprised by this turn of events? I'm very curious what you have to say. So let's turn to the live chat here as we go in. And if you have not hit like yet, please do. So it certainly does help get the algorithm to push us out there much more so than yesterday. And that reminds me, by the way, I'm just curious if anybody, how many people had this show up in their feed? This is my live stream from yesterday. Because according to my own analytics, yesterday's live stream was not pushed out by anybody. And you might be able to tell why, judging from the title. Just thought I'd throw that out there. Let me know in the live chat if you actually were told, if YouTube even let you know about this one. But yes, I'm curious what people are saying here in the live chat. Let's take a look. Cynical Larry says, what is the next evil that is going to occur? Who knows, but it's always, at least the evil things happening now this year are different than they were for the past few years. I can't say, I don't have a good word to describe it, but there's something different about the flavor of things going on right now. And he says, a demonic-themed event opposed to celebration of the Mass. No surprise there. Satan has been unleashed. And yes, the ideas are contradictory. You can't have the holy sacrifice of the Mass, the transubstantiation, the Eucharist, Christ being made manifestly present physically in the most blessed sacrament of the altar at an event that seems at least partially dedicated to evil. Catholic says, I believe this is in line with anti-Catholic sentiment. I believe so too. Mikey Boss lets me know that they did show him the thing yesterday. Okay, good. Phillips says the U.S. Olympic Committee does not formally sponsor or employ chaplains to travel with athletes as part of the official Olympic delegation. Okay. And I kind of get that because in the United States, we're supposed to have like a neutrality with the government when it comes to religion. Not something I agree with, but I understand the logic of it. And if that's been their long-standing practice, they didn't change anything, then that's far less bothersome than the mass having been allowed and then suddenly not. Let's take a look here. All right. A lot of people didn't watch the games this year. All right, folks. Thanks very much for tuning in today. If there's any final thoughts, please pray for this priest and pray that the conscience of the people behind the Olympics get illuminated on this, because it's going down a real dark place. Patty says, just wonder what little surprise they'll have for the Paralympics starting in 9 days' time or thereabouts. If there's something big that happens, I'll cover it here if it's relevant to what we do here. All right. It reminds us the Olympics were halted in Christendom and most sports stopped and didn't reemerge until 1800s, early 1900s. There's a reason why. Well, sports isn't the problem, and soccer has been played since like the Middle Ages. So soccer's been around. Athletic competition isn't a problem. And before soccer, there was like jousting and all sorts of other things. But there were reasons that they stopped the games, that a Catholic emperor of Rome stopped the Olympic Games, and then they didn't show up again until like the 19th century for good reason. But I have a problem with athletic competition in general. Anna Rao asks in the live chat, prayer request for the reposed soul of her Aunt Mary, whose funeral mass is tomorrow. She was 101, for the soul of her sister Sally, whose birthday would be tomorrow. She passed at the age of 16 with her mother. That is unfortunate. Yes, please pray for the repose of the souls of those requested. All right, folks. Thanks very much for tuning in today. And as always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.